Know Why listeners, why are all the saddest people in English-speaking countries? That's the question I want to talk about today on the Know Why podcast, and it comes from results from the World Happiness Report, which was just released recently. And Arthur Brooks, who I've mentioned many times on the Know Why podcast, wrote an article really digging into the why behind this important finding. So to wrap up Mental Health Awareness Month, which is the month of May, I wanted to end on this note referencing this World Happiness Study and what we can learn and maybe even apply to our lives, because I would wager a guess that most of my listeners are English speaking, primarily in the United States and maybe in some other places as well. So let's dive into the report. So just a few notes on the World Happiness Report. It's different than the Global Flourishing Study, which I've also referenced in the Know Why podcast in the past. And I appreciate that study for some different reasons and kind of what it looks like, what it looks at overall. But I do think that this year's World Happiness Report findings are helpful for us. So it surveys more than 140 countries. One of the primary findings this year was that people who are disproportionately satisfied with life, I'll speak English. So we're talking about United States, United Kingdom, Canada primarily, okay? Between 2006 and 2025, the United States saw a 10% average decrease in self-evaluated life satisfaction. UK and Canada were similar, UK being a little bit less, Canada being a little bit more. And this is specifically the case among young adults. In fact, the group with the biggest drop in happiness were Americans under the age of 25. So I would just take a minute and ask you to think, what would you imagine the reason for this is? Why would people in English-speaking countries, especially Americans under the age of 25, be the ones that have the largest drop in self-evaluated life satisfaction and happiness? Well, if you're thinking anything to do with the internet or social media, you're on the right track. So, as Arthur Brooks notes, it's not all about time spent on social media, though that is a large part of it. And we're going to get into what the report reveals and also some of his hypotheses, which I think are really helpful and actually mesh with a lot of what we talked about on the Know Why podcast recently. So first of all, let's talk about the statistics again. Nearly 80% of 15 to 16-year-olds in the Anglosphere, so that's the word for kind of all the English-speaking countries that we've referenced, more than 80% of 15 and 16-year-olds use social media more than an hour a day. That's the highest in the whole world. So Jonathan Haidt, who again, he wrote The Anxious Generation, co-authored The Coddling of the American Mind, I believe, and we've referenced him multiple times on the Know Why podcast, and Zachary Roush co-wrote the lead essay that went with this year's World Happiness Report. They also noted that cutting social media use for just 2 weeks could reduce the incidence of clinical depression in young adults by a third. So time spent using social media is a big part of why we are seeing a decline in happiness and mental health among young adults and teens who use it all the time. It really does, in many ways, boil down to how much time you're spending on these devices. And yet, it doesn't fully explain the issue because, as Arthur Brooks notes, when you look at the data, you see similar, if not to the full same extent, similar rates of use in other areas of the world. Okay, so here are some of the things he points out. Speaking now of Brooks, more than 2/3 of Asians and Latin Americans use social media for more than an hour per day, and yet their happiness and life satisfaction results have remained stable. So why are they not seeing the dramatic decrease in happiness that young people in the Anglosphere are seeing when they're using similar, if not exactly equal, rates of social media platform time use? Okay, there are 3 hypotheses that Arthur Brooks proposes. The first one is that social media was invented in America for American tendencies. This includes individualistic cultures. So we've talked about that. Remember when I did the book review on Dignity of Dependence, which is a book by Leah Libresco Sargent? We have a very individualistic culture in the United States of America. There are benefits of this because typically Americans have historically had a very strong work ethic. We tend to be independent in thinking that, that's part of the American dream. If you work hard, you can achieve success. And of course, we've talked about how many young adults nowadays feel like that might not fully be the case due to different economic factors and things like that. But traditionally, Americans have had a very independent mindset and a very, can-do attitude. And there are healthy parts of that, but it becomes unhealthy whenever we take it to such an extreme that autonomy becomes an idol. And that's really what the book, The Dignity of Dependence, focuses on. Because in reality, if you go back to how humans were created, we need other human beings. And we all have seasons of life where we are a little more dependent on other people, and that's okay. Or where other people depend on us more, and that's also okay. Other cultures tend to get this more, and that natural human mutual dependence is more integrated into communities and to society than it often is in the Anglosphere, particularly in America. And so that's something that we have to keep in mind. So since social media was designed here, it played to those tendencies. And one of the things that comes with a very individualistic culture is sometimes an overfocus on the self. And that's why a lot of social media platforms, as you surely noticed, they tend to be very self-promotional in focus. It's all about creating your online identity, your persona, your best foot forward, really. What image of yourself are you portraying to the digital world? Which for digital natives who grew up with the internet ever since they were children, in many cases, that is the more real world to them than their physical neighbor who lives next door or across the street that they never actually talked to. So the self-presentation and promotion tied into the very individualistic culture is a very American thing, and it makes sense that social media tends to be this way because it was designed here by Americans. So when you are from a culture that maybe doesn't have those tendencies, some of those individualistic or self-promotional parts or aspects of social media can be mitigated a little bit, and we'll get more into that. But the second hypothesis that Arthur Brooks proposes for why the Anglosphere has a harder time coping with social media is that in English-speaking countries, people use types of social media platforms that are more individualistic and algorithmic, which are the worst kinds for you. So let's think about social media. That is a big blanket term, but in today's day and age, there are so many different kinds of social media platforms. It really helps us to delineate. And there are categories that are really geared toward keeping in touch with people. And then there are others that are geared toward really consuming or either, again, self-promoting. So an example of a platform that was designed to keep in touch with people, Facebook, especially in the early days, it's really changed now, so I don't know if it fully fits in that category, and Brooks notes this as well, but it was originally designed to just friend people, usually that you already knew. You could post a little status update, other people could respond, you're sharing pictures of your vacation, your friends are able to see them. And when Facebook was first released to the public, and I remember I was a teenager and my mom got a Facebook, and the first thing she did was start looking up old high school classmates and connecting with people that she had lost touch with over the years. And it was so fun for her because she was like, oh my gosh, it's so and so, and they were able to message or see pictures of each other's grandkids and things like that, just reconnecting with old friends. And in that sense, it was fun. Still not a replacement for real in-person community, but it was fun because it was helping you keep in touch with other people. Nowadays, again, it's changed a lot, so I think that it's lost a lot of that purpose. But even though I don't really use Facebook to see status updates because my feed is so inundated with random stuff that the algorithm serves up that I'm not even interested in, I will use it for certain groups or events or to see what, the local town is doing, things like that. So in some ways, Facebook retains that element of helping people connect, usually with people that you already know in your real life. Another example would be WhatsApp. A lot of people use that to communicate, especially internationally, because it's one of the platforms that makes it easier to have calls and messages and communications across international lines. So around the world, that is a very popular platform because it's one of the primary ways that people keep in touch with others. And so I've used it off and on in the past for different reasons because it does make it easy to keep in touch with certain people, even if they might not be in the States for that time or whatever. There are other smaller examples of things like this where it is, yes, social media, but it is specifically geared toward connecting you with people that you already know in real life that you want to keep in touch with. So in other parts of the world, the non-English speaking world, those are the predominant types of social media platforms that are used. People in the Anglosphere and English speaking countries, they tend to spend more time on the less healthy types of social media. Not that they're healthy at all, maybe just the totally bad. Things like TikTok or even Instagram, where it is very algorithmic. It is very focused on self-presentation. So you are either presenting yourself and curating an image to show the world. This is where especially you see like influencers and things like that, or you're on there to consume. It's the short form videos that are destroying people's attention spans and that are sucking you into an algorithm that often is taking you deeper and deeper into a rabbit hole. Facebook uses algorithms too, which is why I was saying it's kind of a mixed bag. But those are like, there is so much research, lawsuits we've talked about that really show how damaging those kinds of social media platforms and those algorithms can be, especially for young people. So the kind of social media use really does matter. The third hypothesis that Arthur Brooks proposes for why people who are in the Anglosphere are less happy, even though their rates of social media use are similar to people in other parts of the country, is, again, it ties in kind of to the others of the individualistic culture and the types of social media that you're using. But in other parts of the world, people tend to have better embodied community. But in the English-speaking cultures, we are seeing major declines, and this is a quote from Arthur Brooks, in social trust, civic engagement, neighborliness, friendships, and romantic partnerships. But he uses the example of in Latin America, you have tight-knit families, extended family, communities of friends and neighbors, and engaging in those broader networks of in-person, embodied community is still the norm. So when you have that type of community in your real life, then you are going to be more likely to have that counterbalance. Yes, you may be on social media, but according to what we see in the data, they're using the social media to actually keep in touch with their real life community or augment that, and they're not becoming completely disconnected from that real life, real in-person embodied community. And if you happened to listen to the episodes that I recommended last week, that were some that we've done a couple of years ago on the Know Why podcast, but were really relevant for mental health awareness, one of them was with Mark Mitchell. And he was saying that really he doesn't even use the word community for online associations because community has to be embodied. So if you're not physically with people, it's kind of a misnomer to use the word community, and yet online community, and I'm using air quotes if you're not watching, has become such a part of our language that we just consider groups of people who might have things in common online as communities. And I'm not saying that you can't find, beneficial connections and maybe even relationships online, but really that's not what community is. Community needs to be in person, it needs to be embodied, and if people don't have a network of friends and family that they are connected to in real life, then they're going to really suffer from the damaging effects of the most harmful types of social media, and that is what the World Happiness Report reveals. Now, what do we do with this information? Well, Brooks ends by laying out two possible outcomes. Either Asia and Latin America, who are kind of the counter examples that he was using based on the data in the report, they will follow English-speaking cultures down our lonely and sad trail of being disconnected from community and being the worse for using social media. They'll just be slower along the trail and lagging behind. Or we will actually reverse course and go the opposite direction and learn to use social media in healthier ways. And he ends on an optimistic note, saying that he thinks that that's what's going to happen. And as I've pointed out, Gen Z is really leading the trend with digital detoxes, trying to form healthier relationships, because they were the guinea pig generation where they had social media, they had internet access, they had the screens from a young age before there was any research on the effects. They grew up with that. They grew up with all of the negative effects of the worst kinds of social media, like Instagram and TikTok and the algorithms. When they were at very formative times of life, they've seen and felt the damaging effects of that, and they are often going analog or getting the light phone or the more minimalistic phones like flip phones and things like that. They're doing social media fasts and Sabbath and trying to disconnect from their phones and from social media, which I think is great. And so that gives me some optimism too, that there is a drive to try to develop healthier relationships with social media. But a lot of it is because people have started to notice and they've started to push for it and raised awareness and education efforts about how bad these things and these platforms are for people, especially for young people. So I don't think it's just happening by accident, but I think that people are responding to the awareness in very hopeful and optimistic ways that I see as being optimistic by especially the people who have been the most harmed by it. So he uses his own kids as an example here, Arthur Brooks does, saying that they have social media. He has 3 adult children, but they have really great in-person communities as well. Here's a quote that he says, "My kids' good digital hygiene tells only part of the story. They, like today's Latin Americans, have real relationships with tight-knit communities. They host friends for dinner parties and go to the park with other young families after church. In fact, social media is a snore compared with their lives off the internet." And I think that's key and what I really want to focus on. Your real physical life should make social media seem boring. If all of your fun and entertainment and excitement is coming and community is coming from social media or the internet, then you're doing life wrong, and that's not how you were made to function as a human being. If you are using social media as just another way to connect with your real life community and your real life friends and stay in touch with certain things, then that can be okay, as we have seen demonstrated by other cultures around the world. But you have to be grounded in the real world. The real world has to be your real world. You have to be rooted in embodied community and have strong friendships. A lot of research has shown this doesn't necessarily mean having a ton of close friends, but even a tight circle of real friends that are meaningful, where you can actually be open and honest with, that you can turn to have honest conversations during the hard times of life and can be there to support each other and you can hang out with. It doesn't have to be a huge circle, but you do need to be rooted in real life community. So I love this, and I think that there are some ways we can say, all right, let's use social media in a healthier way, both for us personally, and if you are with kids, if you're teaching youth group, if you've got kids of your own, or you're thinking about if your future family, then we can say, well, here's how we can teach them based on the lessons that our generation has learned. Here's how we can teach them to be intentional. 1, using platforms that emphasize communication with others over algorithmic consumption. So and this is something that I've done in the last month, I've just stopped watching Reels. Or I've never gotten on TikTok, but the Reels on Instagram has been a battle. And it's so easy to just without even thinking, click on the little Reels symbol. Because I do use social media. I use Instagram personally to keep in touch with certain issues or certain people. So I don't want to get rid of it entirely. But now that the Reels tab is there, it's so easy to get sucked into that and just lose time and damage my attention span. And I just feel gross after I've sat there and wasted time looking through a bunch of short form videos. And I know a lot of people feel the same way. So I've stopped looking at them altogether just so I don't get sucked in. And there are tools that can help. One of them that I've used, and I'm not an influencer, I'm not getting paid to promote it, but it's a product called Brick, and I'll link it, that actually locks any of the apps on your smartphone that you want it to lock. That's been a game changer for me, because if I need to get on social media to promote something on the Know Why podcast, or just personally, I want to check in with something, I'll get on, I'll do what I need to do. And then before I get lost and start clicking on a bunch of other things, then I will just lock it back up. I will put the little physical brick key away somewhere, and then it's not even an option. One of the things that Brooke said is that one of his kids carries a flip phone on the weekend, and there are more programs or more companies that have that option where you can get a kind of a dumb phone, so to speak, that actually connects with your smartphone so you don't lose all of your data. But if you don't want to carry your smartphone around, you can carry your dumb phone, or some people are just switching to a light phone altogether. There are all kinds of options to help you develop a healthier relationship with your smartphone and with social media, and just using them for what a lot of us originally wanted to use those platforms for, which is connecting with other people. Then we need to start making that the focus again, and utilizing all the new tools that are coming out to help us do that. Another tip that I would recommend that we tell other people, like our kids, if they're at that age where they're getting social media, which should be like late teens at the youngest, only add people on social media that you know in real life. Don't start following a bunch of people that you don't know. It's not relevant to you. You can read newspapers if you want updates on the world. You can follow, a podcast account that you listen to, like the Know Why podcast, on social media. But in terms of just adding a bunch of people on there, add people that you know, and keep it at that. It should be a way for you to communicate, again, with people that you already know in real life. Don't click on those reels and videos where you get sucked into the infinite scroll. Like I was saying, just place boundaries and limits around that. I think those are some ways that we can develop healthier social media use. And again, the most important thing to counterbalance all of that, because if you eliminate all of that, but you still don't have good in-person community and quality relationships and friendships, you're still missing out on a core human experience that you need. So go out. Be open to people. Sit on the front porch. Choose the cashier instead of self-checkout. Invite somebody over. Have people over to your house. It doesn't have to be complicated. Just get together for a game night. Go join a small group at your local church and get involved to meet people. Join a book club. There are so many options. And you can even use a social media platform like Facebook to go follow your town and see what kind of events are going on. Go to your library and see what kind of events they have going on for the community. There are still so many resources now. And ironically, the thing that was originally supposed to supposedly connect us more to all of that real life stuff has ended up separating us from that. But we can be intentional about using the tool for what it was designed to do, and then going out and living real life. And I think that's the big takeaway from this World Happiness Report, is that if we want to turn around and reverse course and not keep walking down this lonely trail of unhappiness and dissatisfaction and poor social media use, we've got to start with ourselves and our own families and change some of our habits. And I'm seeing a lot of people do that, and it's encouraging. And that's going to help our mental health rates in the United States and the Anglosphere at large so much. So that's where I'm going to end it. So we ended up doing kind of a mini series this month in May with mental health awareness. So I encourage you to go back and listen to any of the episodes that you may have missed from this month, and check the resources for more if you want to dive deeper. And I'll see you next week on the Know Why podcast.